Philomythia podcast.
I really want to talk about how TikTok is affecting music now. No, I'm just kidding. That's a whole.
I want to talk about how TikTok is the devil.
Right. Eric.
Yes.
I'm Ian.
I'm Eric today.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
I like that. It's been
That
a while.
seems like a good name.
Man, it's been a while since
Earth
you've been
person.
Eric.
Yeah.
You know.
Got to keep it in the rotation, but, you know.
Yeah.
Don't have to use it. Don't have to overplay it.
I mean, you could. I mean, just like auto-tune.
Yeah. But who wants that?
Singer.
Yep.
We're here to talk today about things we love, like games and
Joy.
D&D and
Rolling dice.
monsters,
Fate.
dragons.
Butts. Well,
Well,
maybe not butts.
I mean, they're in there.
They're in there. A little bit.
But I mean, I don't know if they're like prevalent.
Dragons have butts.
Do they?
Did you ever think about that?
Aren't they hindquarters? Wouldn't they be?
I mean, you could call them hindquarters. Speaking of dragons, totally off topic, but I watched a little bit more on episode 2 of House of the Dragons.
Oh, nice.
Or House of the Dragon. Man, those dragons look so fucking cool. Like Rhaenyra's dragon, awesome. Damon's dragon? Damien?
Damon.
Yeah, so cool, dude. So unique and interesting. Like Damon's dragon is this red dragon that's all long and kind of wyvern-like.
Yeah.
Awesome. Just great.
I'm caught up on it.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
So this is it's the part. This might be a spoiler. I'm gonna try to not be spoiler, but episode 2 when they're on the bridge at Dragon Keep, Dragonstone, when she flies up,
Yeah,
you get to see the two. And I'm reading the book Fire and Blood, which is fucking awesome. It's so good.
That's cool.
It really proves to me. I'm like, yeah, for me, Martin is a legit like engaging writer because it's a history book, but you're like engaged the whole time.
Oh, that's cool.
It's not boring at all.
I'd have to give. I like history, so I'd give that a whirl.
It's really good, especially if you like the Targaryens. If you find that house interesting, because it's just about how crazy things were before Game of Thrones starts, which real crazy. Spoiler alert. Really, really fucking crazy. Really crazy.
This is the first time I've stayed caught up too on a type of show like as it's airing.
Yeah, that's not your thing.
Yeah, but I wasn't initially too interested in watching it.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, fine, you know, I'll watch it as it comes out, sure. And I found that I am enjoying it, rather. Like,
That's good.
One of my favorite things about it is how drastically vicious it is.
Yeah.
It is... It's got some darkness to it, and I'm like, I'm into that. I like that. So yeah, digging it. I will not argue, but I think the dragons look awesome. That is 100% accurate. But you know me, man. I'm gonna say the hot take here. They're not dragons. They don't look. They're wyverns. They don't have front arms, and that makes my brain crazy.
Well, I mean, it's not D&D.
Right, and that's like whenever I see dragons, that's how my brain wants the dragon, is with the front arms.
Right.
With wings. So when I see dragons with just wings, I'm like, what are they gonna do? They can't arms.
I think some of that, it might have been Martin's choice, just how he liked in his head to look, but I think some of it for the show was a decision on like, okay, what would be more anatomically correct to get a fucking animal this big into the sky? Oh yeah, they probably wouldn't have front arms.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, but it makes sense from a. I mean, there's an aesthetic to D&D dragons. It's really cool with the 4 legs. It's more like a cat.
Exactly.
Almost with wings.
And that's I gravitate towards the look of that, because then even like when you have like the like luck dragons or the Asian inspired dragons, because I don't know if they have Chinese dragons. Like I don't know if Japan or any of the other Asian cultures.
I'm sure they do. Usually it kind of filters down from China.
Right,
so
but
probably
those
something. Like
even those long ones still have like the little 4 arms.
But they don't have wings.
No, but that's so true. You're right. But it just my brain. I'm more willing to accept the luck dragons as dragons or the celestial dragons as dragons than the wyvern looking ones. I do accept them as dragons, obviously.
I think the Chinese dragons are associated with like this is not a Chinese word, but kundalini and like inner fire. So I think that tends to be why they look more serpent-like.
Right.
Fun fact, though, most dragons in history are always associated with water.
Oh, really?
So like the Hydra actually was a river, so they think whatever the Herculean myth is based on, it was actually him like damming up rivers.
Oh.
It's like you think about cutting off one head and two sprout out. If you try to stop the flow of water, it'll go around, you make two more,
nice.
two rivers instead. Yeah, that seems to be a theme throughout mythology.
That's
weird.
cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. So that might be why they even aesthetically, a lot of dragons have this serpent-like shape. You know, this very long and squiggly because it looks like the body of a river.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. I could be totally wrong on that, but that's what it seems like. So,
yeah.
What are we talking about today?
Well, today we're talking about something that I think is almost, I mean, there's a lot of podcasts out there and a lot of things that people talk about it, but your average D&D player doesn't really probably think about this too much.
Probably not.
And what's so great, not great, but what's great about that is how big a deal it actually is and how almost every problem you ever encounter can be solved with it. What is it, Eric?
It's communication at the tabletop for your games. And really improving your communication is really the spin today. We've talked about this before, but I don't think it was ever like, okay, we're only, you know, this is the focus for today.
Right.
So this is going to be our focus today. If you don't like this, if this is boring, I'm sorry. There are some cool homebrew rules at the end, so feel free to skip there if you don't. If you're like, boring, that's fine. If you get in a lot of arguments or misunderstandings at your table, you might want to come back to the beginning, though.
Yeah, you might.
That's all I'm going to say. That's all. So, do you want me to go into some definitions?
Yeah, let's get a little definitions here.
So, a good thing to start with is ask, okay, well, what is communication? What does it mean in terms of historically, and what does the word mean? So, I, of course, looked up too many things. There's this really cool site that kept coming up. Let's see if I can find it, because that's not the one.
I'm not the one.
There we go. WordNick. Have you ever heard of this? WordNick.com? It's basically an open source community of people who they kind of crowd resource the definitions of language. So it's got a bunch of different definitions of things from different dictionaries all in one place. I was like, that's really cool. I want to pay more attention to this. It's even got etymology. So I looked at the etymological definitions first. And if you don't know what that word means, it's a very fancy word meaning the history of the word. Where did it come from? Because these words didn't just pop out of the ether in English. They came from Latin or Proto-Indo-European, also known as Pi, or something like that. So, communicate has a bunch of feelings. It has a bunch of definitions, but it's, you know, to give or transmit. So you could think of like communicating a disease. It can mean to share, communicate, impart, inform. My favorite one, though, is communicare, which is Latin, literally means to make common. And for me, that's a big framing point with this word is when you're communicating with somebody else, you're trying to get on the same level as them so that you can have a common experience. I think that's, to me, what's really going on, at least for me. And so I went, okay, well, what does common mean? So general, free, open, public, it's a plurality, right? It's all of us together. So communication always has to do with, it's not to just talk about in reference to tabletop RPGs, it's not a singular act. You're always communicating with another person. Can you communicate with yourself? Absolutely. That's not what we're talking about today. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
So what are the parts of communication? It's speaking and listening, really, right? Output and input. That's at a basic mechanical level. That's basically what it is. Oh, yeah, the other cool for like communication and everything that I like is to receive communion, which is what the Catholics do.
Right.
To be connected with one another is cool as well. Or to make known. That's a really good one. So you're, especially as a DM, that's what you're always trying to do is make the unknown known for your players, right?
Yeah.
Okay, speaking and listening. What do those mean? And I'm going to go through these really quick. Capable of speech, involving speaking or talking, expressive or telling. This is one that I thought was really interesting. True to life or lifelike.
That's weird.
So if something can speak, we recognize it as to be lifelike. If you think about like AIs, right? Or all these assistants, they are lifelike because they speak. If we frame it through the lens of these definitions, that's an adjective, I guess, if you're using it that way.
Well, to add just like another little thing to that, I mean, we even do that with like animals that make a sound at us.
Yep.
They're speaking and we're listening, and we think they're listening to us speaking as well.
Yep.
So I mean, that's for sure. Keep
Makes
going,
sense, right?
Yeah, keep going.
And well, that's pretty much it. But speaking has some kind of, like, if you look at the etymology, it has these connotations of like reciting and conveying information, but also kind of commanding, which is interesting because when you get to listen, the origins of listen, the etymologies of listen, have to do with obedience, which I thought was weird.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Not really. It doesn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about today, because I don't think DMs are concerned with your players being obedient.
Right. But
you do want them to listen to what you have to say. So it comes from the Old English hlisen, so hlysan, maybe HLYSNAN, hlysnan. Hlysnan to me.
Hlysnan.
Which means to listen, hear, attend, to obey. So I was like, that's weird. It kept coming up. But I think intuitively we all know what listening means, because we all have to do it every day, at least in theory. Right?
Right. I'm gonna add a little thing in
Sure.
here, little parental thing that parents say or teachers say, and you have one mouth and two ears.
Right.
So I feel like listening is quite important. They say it's twice as important in the little saying, but I didn't really want to.
Yeah.
My
mom used to say that all the time.
Yeah,
sure.
That's probably where I got it.
She would always say you got two ears and one mouth for a reason.
Right.
That was her way of saying it. But that was usually to tell everybody. She was really communicating, hey, shut the fuck up.
Right.
Like I'm speaking right now.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you think about evolutionarily, having two ears is integral to you surviving, because you need to hear on both sides of you just in case something's coming to eat you or kill you,
I agree. Yeah.
So it does make sense. So I really feel like this is a highfalutin way, but my definition is like communication is the art and science, because it's very imprecise. It's got some technical things like grammar and syntax and subjects, but also communicating isn't just words, which we'll get to, but it's the art and science of conveying information to another person in order to find common ground, which is too wordy, but you're conveying information to get on the same wavelength with somebody. I'm like, that's pretty good, especially with D&D. You want to have a shared mental space with your players,
Yeah.
Or if you're a player, you want to be in that shared mental space. You want to help reinforce it, ideally. So that's really all I have on the origins.
That was good.
It.
I like that.
However, there are a lot of problems with communication. It's a lot of problems. Some of them are people don't want to listen most of the time, and people don't want to understand. I would say especially nowadays and a lot of our solutions that we'll talk about at the end of this episode have to do with dealing with the problems specific to online play.
Right.
Which is different than table play, because that's what we have experience with, and that's what more and more people are doing when they play D&D, is it's online now. Not everybody, but a lot of us. People's mental bandwidth seems to be at capacity. So there's so much shit, they have no more room for your words. Most speech isn't that interesting to listen to, and I find this as a teacher, the more you talk, the less value your words have, because it just turns into noise. So the more concise I am with a student, if I can be like, this, not that, do this, do it this way, stop, that gets a much better reaction than if I'm like, okay, I'm going to over-explain everything like Eric likes to do. I'm just going to keep talking, and everyone's like, yeah, okay, stop. I don't need to hear you speak anymore.
I really, sorry, but go
ahead.
I really do like that idea of the more you talk, the less value your words have. That's very interesting to me, due to the fact that in my later years, I'm not a big talker. With like, Eric or some of my friends, I'll talk more. But when it comes to most of my interactions in life, I'm pretty quiet. And I like to think that, just like you said, I like to feel like when people do hear me speak, my words mean what they mean. Like, they're like, oh, if he said it, that's what he means. Like, Ian doesn't just say things to keep saying things. That's not his thing. Like, there's no way. There's a lot of things in there. Did you hear that?
There's a lot of things in there. There's a lot of things on different levels.
There's a lot of things.
Well, it's interesting. This book is really controversial, so I guess I'll put a trigger warning on it just in case. There's a book called The 48 Laws of Power, I want to say, by, what is his name? I have it on my shelf, but I don't remember his name.
He wrote Mastery, didn't he?
He did, yeah, which I love that book.
Yeah.
That book is really, really good.
John Brown?
No, Robert Greene.
Who's a color.
Yeah. Hey, you were close. Rob, John, And I'm not saying this is true or that I take it as true, but I find it interesting that one of the laws is speak less in your work environment because people will think that your opinions are more valid.
Right.
Essentially. If you're talking all the time, again, it's almost like the meaning and syntax just becomes noise.
Right.
People just turn you off.
Right. Even though, like, speaking more, you're trying to make it easier to understand.
Right.
But sometimes that doesn't come through like that. Sometimes it does, but I mean...
And I say this as an over speaker.
Right.
I talk too much. I say too many words, and there's too much form and not enough content in what I say most of the time. I also think this is the last list I have here, or the last on my list, is I don't think most people think about how they communicate. What words are you saying? How is your information received? When you talk to somebody, do people seem to react badly to you? Why is that?
Oh, man. I feel like that entire sentence that you just said is like my mother telling me things. That is like what I've heard for like so much of my life.
Love you, Ian's mom.
Yeah. She doesn't listen.
She used to.
She just, regardless, what you just said is a huge thing that she's talked about with me is, when I would speak about things or talk to people and their reactions. And she's like, well, if that keeps happening, maybe it's the way that you're speaking.
Right.
And I refused to, like, for many, many years in my younger life, refused to, like, adjust my way of talking to fix how you, being royal you, understand me.
Right.
And as I grew up, I started figuring out this is actually better for me if I change it, because I don't like the reactions I'm getting most of the time.
Right.
I don't feel like I'm being heard. If that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
So
for sure.
That is something that I totally get. Yeah. That's all.
And whatever you think about this topic, I find it fascinating, is the area of neuro-linguistic programming.
Ooh, yeah.
Has this idea that the success of your communication is in the reaction that you get. I think I've even said that in the podcast, probably episode 1 or 2. And I really took that to heart, because if you're not getting the right reaction, if the people aren't understanding, or what you're saying is making somebody angry, maybe you need to rework how you're saying it. Not your intent, but how you're conveying the information.
Right.
And that takes us into a whole rabbit hole, which we're just going to briefly touch on, which is this idea that most communication isn't actually verbal. And that's a big thing, I think, for DMs, is that a lot of our communication is only verbal. When there's been a lot of studies, some people say it's 7% words only, but that's highly disputed. But whatever it is, words are kind of the tip of the iceberg. Your tone of voice, the way you're dressed, your body language, your cadence, your pitch. I mean, do you sound angry all the time? People are going to react to that in a certain way. Absolutely. My face, I have RAF, resting asshole face, so people think I'm angry all the time. It's a problem.
You do have that. It's a thing.
I do, yeah.
And
part of it is wearing glasses too does not help.
Right. And I'm one of his like closest friends, and I'll look at his face and be like, he's mad, and he's not.
I'm not. Yeah. A lot of times I just don't want to convey any emotion, so I just put the shield up.
Right.
So that's the other thing. So there's a lot to be said for DMs about, how do people, when they first see you, not saying you should change the way you dress or anything, but how are you perceived? And if you have low self-confidence, that might be really painful to just go up to your friends and be like, hey, how do I come off? So there's some other solutions we can talk about if you're really introverted and you don't want to deal with other people. But it does help to know how other people see you if you want to know how your communication is going to be received.
Right.
And a lot of it is not actually the words you say. It would be nice if it was. That'd make it more logical and systematic, but that's not the way it is.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
No, it is not.
So I figured this is a good time for us to talk about some of our experiences and issues that have come up on the tabletop.
Oh, yeah,
so to speak. Yeah.
Sure.
So regale us, Ian, with your stories.
Me.
We're going to keep it anonymous as much as possible.
God. Where to even begin? It's a lot of my stuff is a lot of my experience comes from my early days of playing D&D a few years ago, where I didn't fully appreciate what I was getting into and how much I was gonna like it. So I kind of regarded it a little bit less important and I didn't really think about the way I was presenting myself and acting. I was more just being Ian rather than anything else. Man, I don't even know where to start.
Just start.
Communication. Well, I mean, first and foremost, let's talk about when I ran a campaign. I don't feel like I set a very good expectation of what it was going to be and how it was going to be, because when we started, the communication level was, erratic and it was chaotic, and it just got more and more and more so. And I think I know a lot of that was my fault, which I should have set a better boundaries, which I think is a big part of communication is boundaries. There was a lot of issues with characters, and one player wanted to change their character after they played a little bit, wanted to play something not as involved. It worked out pretty well for a little while, but when I changed everything is where things got heavy.
Right.
And this is actually something me and you talked about more recently, is role play on the table and talking in character or talking as characters. And I think this has to do with communication. Is a lot of players and a lot of people speak and they don't really know where they're going with the words they're saying. So they just start talking, and then in this digital format, someone else starts talking because for them, they heard that pause, which wasn't really a pause. They kept talking, but due to the delay,
right,
they didn't know that. Now they're both talking, so one of them stops, and again, the delay. So now we're talking on top of each other. Now a third person thinks that people are stopping, and then a fourth person is like trying to get everyone to shut up, and there's me, the GM, letting it just play out.
Right.
Because I'm like, I don't really know what to do about this. Let's let them see where it goes. And then, 15 minutes goes by of them talking through whatever they're talking about, and nothing's happening. There's nothing progressing. You look at two of my other players, and their eyes are starting to gloss. And it's like, shit. So I feel like, for me right now, that's instead of me floundering about for you guys, that's probably my thing that I'm looking at now that I've seen from what came from my campaign. Because my campaign was the last one we played before the one we're in now, so it still feels very fresh to me, even though it was a while ago. So that's a big thing for me. Is what about you, Eric? Like, where do you find a line in how much you should speak as a player? As a character. Do you have a way that you do that?
Well, my gauge actually comes from like my own fears. Is that not so much anymore, especially doing this podcast has actually helped me. I'm just realizing now of being afraid that I'm talking too much, because I felt like I did that in high school a lot, and my perception was not lining up with how other people saw me, and that's like one of my worst phobias, is like seeing myself in one way and the reality is completely different.
Right.
So when I'm a character, and sometimes I get a little more selfish when I'm playing rather than DMing. I have a different perspective, and some of it's okay, and some of it I need to work on. But looking at okay, how much have I talked? Like, are other people getting the chance to be involved, or at least having the chance to do that, even if they don't want to? Mm-hmm. So it's more my emotions. I kind of gauge off how uncomfortable do I feel. I'm going to feel uncomfortable the whole time. But is it starting to peak past a certain point, which is very vague because it's not something that's explicit, mm-hmm. right?
Right.
So it has to do with, okay, do I feel like I've talked too much? Because I'll usually know if I've gone past my own line inside, like, yeah, you're taking up too much space right now. So as a player, I tend to gauge it that way. Mm. If I'm the DM, it's more about, are people telling me to shut up? Like, one thing that happens a lot is somebody will ask me a question, I'll try to explain it, and they'll interrupt me and tell me to stop talking, which really frustrates me. But I think it's also the players are trying to tell me something unconsciously, like, yeah, we got it. You don't need to keep speaking, which is a hard fact to take, because it's like, look, you asked me a question. Why can't you just let me answer it?
Right. So
different hats for what side of the table I'm on, you could mm-hmm. say, or the side of the screen I'm on. It's still something I'm working out, because communication, I always felt like I'm terrible at it. So I think about it a lot and try to decide how I can be better, especially because my job and my passion rely on communication. So I'm a teacher. I teach online. If my communication isn't good, I'm going to lose my students. Mm-hmm. Because they won't get the change. They need some kind of change. They need to see that they're getting better and feel good about it. And also D&D, it's all just talking. There's a bit of rolling, but most of it is having a conversation with people you like, hopefully that you like. So, different techniques. It's much more emotional as a player.
Right.
Where I've thought about it less, and I should think about it more. I just I'm only realizing it now, like, oh yeah, I could really do the same things I do as a DM.
Mm-hmm. Like, as a player,
mm-hmm.
I have that same kind of gauge. And again, anyone listening, this is just how we do it. Mm-hmm. I usually like to be concise and say a few words in my character, or have a few sentences, and then I'm done. Like, and I'm not gonna, like, if someone continues conversating with me, my mm-hmm. responses are gonna be a few words. At least I'm hoping. Just like, oh yeah, this.
Right.
Let them talk. Just like you said, it's more about, I've been in the spotlight for a minute, mm-hmm. like, and I literally mean like a minute or two. I need to bow out. Like, I want someone else to have a spotlight, because that's part of the thing, is sharing the spotlight in D&D and being able to, like you're saying, communicate and let that move naturally in a digital mm-hmm. space.
Sure. Is
very challenging sometimes. Especially if you're like a drinker. Like, I like to drink.
Or a substance user, let's say that.
It can derail things quite quickly.
Yeah.
If a player does not understand how much space they're taking up.
Yeah. Sure.
And we all do it. I'm not, like, I have derailed things and messed with people socially in the games many times.
I think, too, to interject, that the problem with something like drinking at the table, which I'm fine with, but it can go overboard very quickly, is that the person who's drunk is having a lot of fun. Like, it's totally innocent. They're not trying to hurt anybody. They're not trying to take up the space. But it can get real brutal for others mm-hmm. very quickly, So it is a hard line, and we'll get into this, but I think one of the things is, like you said, setting expectations early, mm-hmm. and that's what a good zero session will do. Yeah. Is like, be very clear about these kind of things that seem like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to bring that up. That's lame. No, do
it.
The other thing is, deal with something when it comes up. Be very assertive. Mm-hmm. I think as a DM, or even as a player, we'll talk about some techniques and some tools that you can use at your table in a little bit. But handling problems as they come up, I hate doing it, but man, is it valuable.
Oh, so
does it solve a lot of issues. Again, coming down to you actually have to communicate to solve the problem. Most time it's not going to sort itself out.
Oh, for sure.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. How about you? You give me something here.
So, I mean, I've had a lot of various experiences. The one that always sticks out in my mind was the Sunday campaign. And there was a new player who, I mean, we didn't do 0 sessions. I didn't even know what a 0 session was, to be honest.
Right.
I don't even think we did preludes. So, like, I wasn't even doing solo sessions for any of the characters, I don't think. And there was one player who it was their first time doing D&D, and they just had totally different expectations. And at one time, I've talked about it a little bit before, but it came to a head. It kind of blew up the table a little bit. One player ended up leaving, and all of it was because of miscommunication and like high emotions. And that really left a huge impression. For a little while it was negative, but more and more it's been a huge lesson in terms of like handling that stuff early and being really, really explicit about what kind of table and game you want to run and what's expected from the players, because a lot of times they have no idea unless you tell them. They're not just going to figure it out by osmosis. Even though for me, it's probably from my teenagehood, it's like, oh, it's lame. We don't need to talk about that. That's stupid because I feel uncomfortable. No, right. You do. It's not stupid. It's important.
That's why you're uncomfortable, because it is important. It needs to be done.
And you just don't want to talk to people. That's really the issue.
To add just a little sparkle here, I was there during this thing.
You were?
That you're talking about. That was all I had to say. I don't want to talk about it.
I thought there was more. I was waiting.
No,
your tone went down. I was like, and?
Because I'm shamed. I feel shame for that.
I mean, I know we could say you incited it, like you lit the spark, but the tinder was already there.
Right.
And as a DM, I feel like the onus, let's say, was on me. But I just didn't know. That's the thing, is your first couple of campaigns, you're going to make a whole lot of mistakes, and you have to accept that's how you're going to learn.
Yeah.
You have to get started. And like I tell my students, momentum is much more important than perfection. Getting going and moving, that's what will allow you to get better at the thing. If you're worried about it being perfect, that's all you're going to do is spend time worrying about it being perfect. You'll never get started.
Right.
You know? So I know you feel that way. I wouldn't, but you're going to feel the way you feel, you know, for sure. Ian can definitely be, especially, you know, only a year into it, he could rub people the wrong way as his character a lot of the time.
Yeah.
That would happen ever so often.
It was, you know, I find humor in that kind of stuff as Ian.
Right.
And when I create a character in game that's a certain way, I'm excited about the potential for rubbing up weird. Like that's exciting to me, but not to the detriment of somebody.
Right.
Like if it really is hurting someone, I will not. I'm like, oh, dude, this is fun. If it's not fun for you, I'm not gonna do it.
Right.
So it was just like you said. I was the inciter, unintentionally.
Yeah, unintentionally. And the thing about it is we took the time. A player did leave because they weren't willing to communicate. They were just kind of like, I'm done. And I'm like, well, that's your choice. But we actually got to talk through it, and it ended up being really good, and we finished that campaign arc.
Yeah.
So we got through it because we then took the time once we knew there was a problem, like, whoa, wait. Like, oh, this is a real problem. Well, what's going on? What are you upset about? And we were able to sort it out enough to keep going. And so that was also a big learning experience, is like talking through those things instead of just because you might feel tense or it might feel like uncomfortable because somebody's upset. If you talk through it, you'll defuse it. If you come to it with an open attitude and you're willing to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know I was being a jerk, you know, or I didn't realize you felt that way. Those kind of things. So that's another thing, is apologizing when you're wrong goes a long way.
Yeah.
Goes a long way, even if you don't want to do it. So I have a bunch of experiences. I think that's probably the clearest. So it makes the best story.
Yeah.
Let's say that way. Right?
That one is a good one. I had a closing thought on problems.
Do it.
That we're kind of just a little subsect we're in right now. And I see a lot, like I'm on Reddit, and I mostly follow D&D stuff on there. And a lot of the problems that you see people having at tables, like you see these people type these huge like horror stories about players or GMs or DMs doing all this stuff, and then in the comments it's every time you'll see, oh man, you could have like communicated at the beginning and this might not have happened. Doesn't mean it wouldn't have happened.
Right.
But almost all of these issues I see on D&D Reddits are, man, you just need to talk to your GM, or yeah, man, you just need to talk to your player. Like, don't come at them crazy. Just be like, hey, man, this is something that's going on, and I'm wondering, is like what's going on? Like, communicate with them. And I think, like you said, the body language and tone,
right.
Trying to come forward with an openness, like you've said, is very important in this digital space, and in D&D is like, be willing to hear what's going on, because sometimes people are acting out because they feel that they've been slighted, and you may not know why.
And not to get biblical, but an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. So if it's tit for tat the whole time, I mean, you're quickly, not literally but metaphorically, you're quickly in Game of Thrones territory where like everyone's just going to shank each other, and then your table's going to fall apart.
Yep.
No more game.
No more.
So, yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
For sure. So, what about some solutions then?
Oh. I'm going to have you lead this, because you've definitely presented over the last, I'd say, year, quite a few things that have mitigated some of these issues that we have playing with big tables that are all online. So, yeah, let's...
So I'll give some philosophical possible solutions, and then we'll talk about, okay, here's some actual tools that you can use if you just want mechanic things that you can implement in your table. The first one is realize that you can't fix anybody else's communication. You can only fix your own.
Right.
You can only fix your own if you're passing a ball back and forth. You can't fix how they throw and catch the ball. You can only do it for yourself. So that puts the focus on making yourself better at the thing rather than other people, because like the Stoics say, you have no control over that, so why would you spend emotional currency on it? Don't do it. Focus on yourself. This is a huge thing. Again, I'm learning with my students is relax. Just relaxing a little bit. If you're feeling really tense physically, taking some breaths seems so dumb, but it's really important. If you're tense, you're usually going to get more emotional. It's going to be negative, and you're more likely to explode. It's just a fact. If you're relaxed, center yourself, all the mindfulness, qigong stuff that is so popular these days, it can really be the difference between the table surviving and the table exploding or imploding, in my opinion. The truth, in my opinion, is that in the age of online play, speech is even cheaper. So being even more concise and to the point is really important, and there is a ton of good advice out there on how to do that, especially in your writing, how to make it more to the point and getting rid of all this filler stuff. Listen more, speak less. We already kind of talked about that, like 2 ears, 1 mouth. Hard to do, especially if you're a player. You're excited to do your thing, but listening is more important. And I would also say, are you in the table to make things common? Are you there to have a joint experience, or are you there just to do your thing? Because if you're only there to do your thing, your communication's probably going to be shitty.
Yeah. Like
there's no way to fix it. And maybe that's what you enjoy doing, but I bet nobody else is enjoying you being at the table, most likely. Clear speech. Also, I feel like this is really important for DMs. Match the table. So if you got a bunch of people who just want to joke all the time and they want to be silly, you as a DM need to match that energy. You're not going to fix it. You're not going to change it. And a lot of that can be fixed by a good 0 session. Setting expectations, being very explicit about what kind of campaign you want to run, and making sure the players who are there want to have that same experience. Very important.
Right.
Practical advice, be prepared. The more prepared you are before your game, the more you can focus on other people. Just like playing a gig or giving a speech, you don't have to worry about all the other stuff that's already done for you. Here's a big one. This this has been really, this has been a revelation for me, and I was really resistant to it. Ian, he doesn't like doing it. This is not, he fucking hates it. And I'm not saying he should do it, but I found for me so helpful is record your D&D games and then review them. Watch yourself, listen to yourself. How are you communicating? And this is the way, instead of asking other people, you can get around that to a certain extent, is like you can assess yourself when you're not in it. Like, okay, how do I sound? What words am I using? Do I say and like a lot? Because me, Eric, I say that shit all the time. It's horrible. And not that you need to cut it out completely, but are there fill words you say a lot? Do you stutter? Do you trail off? What's your body language? What's the cadence of your speech? All that stuff, you can really understand yourself more by recording and reviewing your sessions. Very uncomfortable. I'm sure everybody's assholes just went, don't want to do that. So don't have to do it, but I found it being just kind of like life-changing in terms of being a DM. Is my DMing got better when I really started to analyze myself. I started doing it just so I could remember what happened, because it's better than any DM's notebook. Record your session, listen to it a few days before. But I started finding much more value out of it. Do speech warm-ups.
Ooh.
There's a bunch out just to get your mouth moving. My lips always get in the way. I usually can't speak, and I'm trying to find ways for this. Very similar to singing warm-ups, but kind of like a voice actor would do before they're going to speak, especially if you're a DM and you have to talk to a group of people. Practice listening to others. Do you understand what people are really communicating to you? Are you making it common? Are you finding commonalities? And then one that I've done a few times, and I feel like it's really good. WebDM talked about this. Is read out loud.
Oh, okay. Read
a poem, read a chapter, read things out loud, talk to yourself out loud, the Sherlock Holmes method. So if you talk to yourself out loud as you're trying to solve a problem, you'll actually cognate better. You'll think through the problem better.
Oh, that's so interesting that you say that.
Yeah. So getting better at talking, you can build it as a skill. I feel like us doing this podcast has made us way better at saying words.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
100%. Because you can't, even if you're, like, I listen to the unedited stuff, but even listening to the edited stuff, hearing yourself, you're like, wow, I could do this, that, and the other thing way better than I'm doing right now.
Right. And there's been times where we've recorded an episode, and then it gets released pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm listening to it, and we'll cross into a certain conversation, and I'll remember the conversation, and I'm listening to it, and I'm like, oh, Eric's wonderful, because that is not how I talk at all. He makes me sound like I know what I'm doing. But I agree. It's a challenging thing to self-critique when listening to yourself GM or as a player.
Right.
Eric is right. I don't like listening to the sessions, but I do actually listen to them. I don't listen to the whole things.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what I do is I'll play them and I'll have them on, and then if like stuff gets kind of boggy, I'll click deeper in,
right,
and then listen for a chunk. Mostly searching for big chunks where there's play happening, so I can know what was going on. Like I listened to our last session when you posted it up, and I was like, because I wanted to know what happened again, and before we started playing, right? And as soon as we were like in the table and ready to go, not ready to go, but you know what I mean. I knew what was going on. I was like, oh yeah, I remember. I know exactly where we're at.
Right.
And it felt good to be prepared in that sense. So it is a huge thing. If you're looking for like a way to do better notes or do something like this, record the session and just listen to it.
Right. It's the single best thing you could do across the board for your D&D games. As long as you're willing to take criticism from yourself. That is the one thing. Like, as long as, if you want to get better at this D&D thing, you should definitely accept criticism. Not unnecessarily, but from yourself, from others, from all sides. Because a better game means everybody's having a ton more fun.
Yeah.
And they're having a better experience, and you're more likely to finish the campaign. I was listening to Sly Flourish, one of his YouTube shorts, and he was reading out statistics, and I think like upwards of 60 to 70% of people don't finish their campaigns. Like, they just implode. I'm like, man, I bet a lot of that could be solved with communication.
Oh, yeah. I would say 90% of it.
Yeah. It's really important, guys and girls and theys and thems and all of you out there playing.
Everything.
Talking to others and finding common ground, which I know is uncomfortable these days across the board. But that is communication. We've got to cooperate if we want to move forward. So anything else you want to add to that?
Philosophy of education.
Education.
No, the philosophy of communication, or like kind of these ideas that we're talking about, a lot of the ones that we're talking about really play into like historically stuff that is a struggle for me. Like I was saying just a little bit ago, I don't like to pad and soften the things I say. If I feel a certain way, I want to say it in a very direct way so it's understood. And sometimes I lean into the fact that people think I'm kind of a jerk. When I'm not. I'm not a jerk. I'm just, and I don't like to, I'm just blunt, because I'm not even really that blunt. If I am going to communicate something severe, I communicate it severely. And that's not always the best way to do it.
Right.
So I, like you're saying, this philosophy, relax, that's one of the things that you were, one of these little things, like relax before you do it. That's changed my life over the last 2 years, is breathing in through my nose, deep into the stomach and out. Like I do that a few times before I like try to talk about something that I'm nervous about or that I'm upset about. And it does do something. I would try to soften the way that I speak when communicating things that are severe to me. Because for the most part, everything's a joke to me until it's not. And my philosophy is, hey man, we can hang until we can't. That's not a great...
You've crossed the line.
Right, it's not great. So I want to touch lastly on something we've both mentioned, and that's setting the precedent at the beginning. Is a big deal. That you need to make it clear what the expectations are of any kind of thing. And when those things come up that maybe you couldn't plan for, you want to talk about them right then, possibly even, which I'm sure Eric might talk about right now, is have a mechanic that you use to do that. And Eric, you came up with one that when I first saw it, I was like, I wonder if that's going to be, it seems like it could work really well. And then employing it, I feel like, especially in the digital world with a bigger table, it's genius. It was such a great idea. I'm going to defer to you to talk about it because you actually have the awareness of putting it together.
Sure. The technique I'm about to talk about, I don't really know where it came from other than, I think, teaching again. Because I spend so much time teaching online that I have a lot of insights of why I'm doing the thing for teaching and otherwise. But I came up with this thing called Party Ordered Play. It's kind of awkward to say, but the acronym is POP, and I'm now calling it the POP filter. So, okay, people, we're putting on the POP filter, taking it off. So it's a little filter for online play about how we're going to view and gamify outside of combat play. Basically, when you're in combat, you don't really need it because there's explicit actions and things like that. So I do have a PDF. I will post it for people to read. Nobody will, but that's okay. It basically revolves around what are called chime-ins. And what that means is that if I'm, as a DM, helping a player, and let's say Ian has something he wants to do, or he's excited by what's happening and he wants to help out, there's like a one-syllable word or maybe a two-word phrase he can say that lets me know, not visually, but orally, so I hear him say it, that will let me know, okay, this person wants to do something, but they don't need to be helped right now. Because what usually happens online is people will just start speaking, and you suddenly have this cacophony or sea of voices going on at the same time, and I can't, not only can I not tell what's going on, but I get really mad. I start to get really frustrated just from the noise happening. And I think I'm particularly sensitive to noise. So I don't think it's a common thing with everybody, but for me, it really bothers me. So that's basically it. Everybody's supposed to get a turn. I track who's chimed in, but it's things like, if you want to do something, especially if it involves role, you chime in with action. So let's say let's just role play, Ian. I'm helping Barry over here. I'm like, okay, Barry, what do you want to do? And you have something you want to do.
Action.
I'm like, oh, I clock that. I know he doesn't need to be helped right now, but as soon as I'm done with Barry, I move over to Ian and I go, okay, what do you want to do? You can say assist. So if Ian wanted to help Barry with something, he would say assist instead, and I would stop what's going on and see how he wants to help. The other big one is flavor. So if you have something that's maybe RP based or just funny or a little character thing, I know that's last priority. Not because it's not important, but because I don't need to interrupt what's happening right now. There are other ones, but those are the three that get used the most. Mm-hmm. And I have some, as a DM, like I can say interjection if I need to interrupt and explain something or embellish something that's going on right now, and some other things like that. So it was uncomfortable talking about it. My players were kind of like, okay, what do you want to do? But after about 5 minutes, it was so natural that my players do it even when I don't require it. Like, people are always like, action. I'm like, yeah, sure. Which for me is the best feeling, that I came up with a mechanic that works so well that my players just took to it. And I had a player who runs his own games who used it, and it also worked. Mm-hmm. So that made me feel pretty good. I didn't mean to come up with something that worked well. I just needed to solve a problem.
Right.
So kind of gamifying free play. And it's called party ordered play because the players choose the order. So there's no like initiative. Mm-hmm. It's just whoever like chimes in first, they get to go. But I keep track, so if like Barry chimes in 6 times with actions, he doesn't get to keep just doing actions. You know, everybody should have a chance to go, even if they don't want to. So it lends a little breathing room. So fortunately, it worked really well, and my players were willing to try it. Mm-hmm. So that was gratifying. So
it was good. I liked it.
Yeah,
I still like it. With when you have a lot of people, it works really well.
Yeah, when you have 3, you don't really need it online because there's enough space. When you have 5 or 6 or 7, it's indispensable for me now.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine not running it that way because it's just so chaotic at that point. You know, I think about some of our early games in 2020, and it's like, oh man.
Oh, for sure.
It's just chaos, you know.
So much chaos.
And to go along with that, this is a chime-in that I have, but this is a big one, is just having a timeout homebrew rule at the table. Like, at any time, anybody can call for a timeout if they're uncomfortable or they're upset or they need to stop the game and take a break for whatever reason. You know, hey guys, pause, timeout. Sly Flourish actually had a really good YouTube short where he talked about, he calls it, I think, press pause. He calls it something different. Same idea. Was he likes to use it all the time to normalize it, so if somebody really has a problem, they don't feel like they're stopping the normal flow of game. So he'll be like, hey guys, pause. Is everybody cool? Like, you know, Zed the Wizard is sacrificing baby goblins. Is everybody all right with that? Yeah? Okay, cool. And then we go back into it.
Right.
I've also heard that the X card, which is a safety tool, works in a similar manner. Online, I know Roll20 has this built in, but online I don't know how it would work at the same. You'd have to adapt it. But you have a just, you know, 3x5 card with an X in Sharpie, and anytime somebody needs to pause or they're uncomfortable with what's going on in the game, they just tap the card and you move on or you pause, that seems pretty elegant.
Yeah.
Like, cool. It's not a big deal in terms of having to say a bunch of words. And safety tools in general, along with a good zero session, are indispensable. So lines and veils I love.
Oh, that's a great one.
Setting expectations. There's a lot of other ones that I haven't tried that would be cool just to see how they work. But a zero session is absolutely 100%. Like, it should be mandatory. If you're not doing it, you absolutely should, because it will clear up a lot of these issues that Ian and I have run into in the past.
Oh, so much. Like, even my zero sessions, when I first did them for my campaign, I never, like, even doing them, I didn't, like, it was more of character sessions. I never even thought of 90% of the stuff that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So I kind of wish I would have. I wish something would have kicked my brain into understanding this then. But that's what did do that, is learning it this way. So, I mean, I love learning in this guerrilla fashion because you learn. Right. Like, you really do learn what you need to. It's just very painful.
It is, yeah. I think, though, too, it speaks to the strength of the D&D community because people much smarter than us came up with 99.9% of this stuff. Right. Like, I didn't come up with 0 sessions. I heard about it for like a year and a half, and I finally decided to try it. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a really good idea. I mean, I feel honored because the D&D community is just full of genius-level people. Like, who just know how to think good in general, but they also happen to love D&D. So we're really lucky in that way, you know. Any other things that you like to use? Any other tools that don't have to, but we're getting pretty close here?
Yeah, I think that most tools, like the pause would be one that I like that. I've never really used it.
Right.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'd like to use it more for sure.
I'm still, you know, struggling kind of with my own figuring things out. I don't have any campaigns running. Oh, wait, yeah, I do. Blades.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. But the one-shots I've been running, and my Blades table is pretty small, so it's very easy for me to navigate. Right now, my biggest issues with that are typically solved with a pause type dynamic or the pop filter.
Yeah.
I really love these tools, and if you love them, you should ask us more about them. Or if you have tools that you think, let us know.
Yeah. What things have helped you? And again, if you don't play D&D, I mean, that's what I love about D&D is the deeper I get into it, you can understand life through D&D, which sounds a little dumb, but it's like we're just talking about communication at this point.
Right.
We'd love to hear any solutions you've come up with, especially if it's something interesting or unorthodox. I'd love to hear weird, like, oh, I do this weird thing and it works really well. Wow, I've never thought about that. Cool, I might steal it. So, takeaways. You can't control other people, so working on yourself is much easier to do than trying to get other people to change. Communication is hard, messy, and inefficient. It's not a good way to do what we do, but it's the best thing we have. You only get better at it by doing it. Like, you have to run games, you have to communicate people and work through the mess. And most of the time, it's the intent of your words that you want people to understand. So you should extend that same philosophy to others. Try to understand what their intention is, not the messy words they're saying, in my opinion.
Oh, that's a hard one for me.
It's really hard because especially if you're hyper-focused on communication, you get caught up in the form rather than what it's designed to do, what the function is. So, yeah, that's about all I have. So why don't you close us out? Leave us with a lasting thought.
I will leave you with this thought. I'm sweaty, so stay sweaty.
Beautiful. Concise.
Thank you.
Like, subscribe.